of U.S. forces. Yes, it was happening before 2007, but not in a systematic manner and not across the entire force. And it wasn't until General Odierno and General Petraeus implemented the precepts of the counterinsurgency doctrine, which was published in December 2006, that this occurred across the force. Now, as far as was security improving before the surge, there's the counterinsurgency manual. This is a graph of security incidents, basically all violent incidents that U.S. forces cataloged between January of '04 and August of '08. Here's the beginning of the surge right here. Now, if things were already improving before the surge, this is an interesting trend line. All right, so he says that things were already improving before the surge. Well, that's here, but look at the slope of the violent incidents. If that's a stock, you want to buy it. Surge begins here, and then you have this period of basically 5 months where the forces were coming in, we were getting off the big bases, the enemy was fighting back, really high intensity fighting there. And here's where we begin the surge of offensive operations in June 2007, and it's there where the violence begins to drop dramatically. After the forces were on the ground, and General Odierno launched an operation called Phantom Thunder in June of 2007. Okay, so myth number 2. It was the awakening that caused improvement in the situation in Iraq, not the surge. Here's a picture of General Petraeus with Sheikh Sadr Abu Risha in Ramadi. This guy, by the way, is right out of central casting for Lawrence of Arabia. He was great. Unfortunately, he was also killed by Al-Qaeda in September 2007. I think I've already discussed this. Yes, the awakening had begun, but it was confined to Ramadi, and it wasn't spreading outside of that. It was General Petraeus's call to his commanders to support the awakening that allowed it to spread as dramatically as it did into the areas north of Baghdad, south of Baghdad. The triangle of death, we like to say, became the circle of life, and into Baghdad itself. Myth number 3, all the surge did was put the insurgents on the U.S. payroll. Well, I think this is, again, the chronology doesn't fit, because the sons of Iraq, here they are in their road guard vests, they came over to our side first, well before we offered to pay them. And you can see by the end, 103,000. Average monthly pay, $16 million. That's cheap at 3 times the price. You know, that is the cost of, you know, maybe 4 M1 tanks. And if you save 4 M1 tanks from being blown up every month, you've just paid for the sons of Iraq. And and that's ignoring the number of lives saved by these guys, because they know their communities. You know, they knew who was who. And what we told Maliki, because Maliki didn't like them, he basically viewed them as insurgents you know, we were paying insurgents and letting them off the hook, is, hey, look, you could either fight these guys, in which case you're going to lose, or you were losing, or you can bring them over to your side. Now you know who they are. We have their fingerprints, we have their names, addresses, they're on our payroll, they're our guys. It was very hard to convince Maliki that he should support them. He never really believed it, and unfortunately, when we left, his support of the tribes fell away, and it's one of the reasons why things are going downhill in a hurry now in Iraq. Myth number 4. It was merely a tactical adaptation to events on the ground. It wasn't a strategic shift. This again is John Gentile. Well, this is General Petraeus' strategy for the surge, which he likened to the Anaconda Plan of Civil War fame. But you can see that everything inside the circle is what al-Qaeda needs. Everything outside the circle is everything we're going to do to impact that. And it's a lot more than just kinetic counter-terrorist conventional force operations. It's strategic communications, engagement with the source countries who are providing suicide bombers, religious engagement, jobs programs, sort of the nation-building component, counterinsurgency inside the wire, which I already discussed, improved intelligence, and then support for reconciliation initiatives and tribal awakenings. This was a holistic strategy. If strategy is the application of ways and means to achieve ends, we changed all three during the surge. We had more means in terms of more forces, we had improved ways in terms of the new counterinsurgency doctrine, and we had different ends as well. Instead of this sort of nirvana of national reconciliation and a Jeffersonian democracy on the banks of the Tigris River, we came up with the buzzword, which failed as a buzzword but was reasonably accurate to what we were trying to achieve, was sustainable security. That in the near term, July 2008, we would have local initiatives with some overarching national initiatives, but there would still be problems. In the intermediate term, that would be knitted together by the time U.S. forces were ordered to withdraw from Iraqi cities. And then long term, you would have an Iraqi nation with a government supported by all parties. We got as far as this. Why we didn't get here, we can discuss in the question and answer session. Surge was merely a forlorn attempt to win hearts and minds. Armed nation building. Well, if that's the case, then why was the first 5 months of the surge the period of greatest U.S. casualties in the war? I'll tell you why. Because the surge was a military operation, and it was meant to control the Iraqi people, not to win their hearts and minds. And we did that through all the means I've discussed earlier. Myth number 6, sectarian cleansing in Baghdad had already stabilized the city prior to the surge. Well, if that's the case, here's a map of ethno-sectarian violence as mapped out using our reporting, our U.S. forces reporting. So this is December 2006, before the surge. The darker the orange, the more violence. Well, if sectarian cleansing had already sorted the city out, why is there so much violence? In fact, sectarian cleansing hadn't sorted the city out. There were still plenty of mixed areas with Sunni and Shia living together, and there certainly was a lot of violence on the borders of those areas, even where sectarian violence had cleared out the city. You could see as the surge takes hold, what happens to sectarian violence. By the end of the surge, literally none left. Myth number 7, Jaish al-Mahdi ceasefire of 2007 was the real reason for the improvement in security. I think I've already discussed this, and I won't dwell on it. Myth number 8, General George Casey's strategy of accelerating transition to Iraqi security forces could have achieved the same outcome as the surge had we given it more time. Patently false. But I'll let General Casey hang himself, because these are excerpts from his own reports. The first is from the Joint Campaign Progress Review, the last one that he signed as Commander Multinational Force Iraq. The situation in Iraq has changed considerably since the Joint Campaign Plan was written. Many of the risks identified within the campaign plan have materialized. Many of the assumptions did not hold. We are failing to achieve objectives in the economic development, governance, communicating, and security lines of operations, that's like all of them, within the planned timeframes. It is extremely unlikely that the end state will be achieved by 2009. Improvements in bringing all the elements of national power to bear are necessary, in particular economic development that improves the lives of all Iraqis, effectively establishing the rule of law, and achieving reconciliation among the Iraqi parties are critical. However, the prerequisite to success in these areas will be protecting the Iraqi population from the sectarian violence that has been spurred on by AQI and extremist organizations such as JAM. Now, if he truly believed that his strategy was going to succeed, this last sentence saying, what we really need to do is protect the Iraqi people, something he hadn't been doing up to that point, is very interesting. This, by the way, is why I think my book explains the surge better than anything in print yet, because I was able to get all these documents declassified. All of Casey's documents and all of General Petraeus' documents. I asked Central Command to declassify them. They did. I knew what was in the documents anyway. And when I got the redacted versions, they basically took out all the stuff dealing with Iran, but left everything else. And so I cite General Petraeus' reports to Secretary Gates and so forth, and have nuggets like this to call people, to call it like it is, based on what people actually wrote at the time, not what they're saying after the fact. And of course, the Iraq Study Group, mission that has no foreseeable end. This is hardly a strategy that's working. Myth number 9, the real reason for the improvement in security was the improvement in the capabilities of Special Operations Forces. This is Bob Woodward's contention. I've already discussed it. Here is what General Petraeus had to say to Secretary Gates about this issue. Nightly raids, no lasting effect on the disposition of the population or the ability of the terrorist network to thrive. Same holds true in Afghanistan, by the way. This is myth number 10, and this is probably the one that I would say seems to have the most credence. All the surge was designed to do was to create a decent interval for the orderly withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq. That's not what it was designed to do. It was designed to improve the security situation in Iraq so that politics would once again become operative, and that the Iraqi people could settle their disputes over power and resources with the ballot box rather than with bullets. And it has to do, and I think that the surge actually created the conditions for this to happen. By the end of the surge in July 2008, politics had become operative once again in Iraq. There were issue-based politics. There were cleavages within the various sectarian parties. The elections of 2009 and 2010 were hotly contested. Sunnis participated in greater numbers than the other sects. And there was a lot of horse trading. It was the kind of politics you like to see. And then we threw that all away by failing to support the democratic process when Iyad Allawi won the election of 2010 by 2 votes. And instead of allowing him the first crack at forming a government, the ambassador over there, Chris Hill, decided, along with Joe Biden, who had been given the Iraq portfolio from President Obama, that we would support Maliki, even though he didn't win the election. And what the Iraqi people then came to realize is that, well, the ballot box isn't going to get us what we want. It's going to be the smoke-filled rooms that decide who's the leader. And from that point on, you could see the backsliding begin and the Sunnis fall away, realizing that everything we had told them about democracy was a lie, in their view. Different visions of what Iraq could become. George Bush, and I was in on every meeting every week, he used to continually harp that Iraq needs to look like South Korea. So what does South Korea look like? We're 60 years on from the Korean War. We still have over 20,000 U.S. forces in Korea. But they're one of our greatest security partners in East Asia, and they're one of our greatest trading partners. But that didn't happen overnight. It took 30 years for that country to become a functioning democracy. And it took 40 for it to become a really vibrant economy. That was Bush's vision for Iraq. It wouldn't happen overnight, but sooner or later, this would look like this. Different vision with a different president. He was elected, President Obama was elected on a we're going to get out of Iraq platform. Remember during his campaign, it was almost like name that tune. I can name that tune in 3 notes. It was, I can withdraw the troops in only 3 months. I can withdraw them in 2.5. And that was the debate among the Democratic leaders. In his view, Iraq was Vietnam, and we just needed to get out. Now, to his credit, when he got in, he didn't immediately pull U.S. forces out. They stayed until the end of the agreement in 2011 when they had to leave. But he also failed to ink a new status of forces agreement that would have allowed U.S. forces to remain. U.S. forces that were the glue holding Iraq together, and the only honest brokers within that whole environment. Basically, the honest brokers keeping a lid on the civil conflict. And those two decisions, the decision not to back Iyad Allawi and allow him first crack at forming a government, even if he failed to form the government, people would have seen that they were following the constitutional procedures, coupled with the failure to keep the U.S. engaged over the long haul, unfortunately made this more of a reality than this. And I await your questions. There I am in my glory days. As General Petraeus said, thanks for watching my back.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions. We've got about 15 minutes. We'll start right here.
Dr. Mansoor, it sounds as though your book will be a fitting volume to sit right next to Fiasco on a bookshelf. Do you think that it would have been as successful had Donald Rumsfeld remained as Secretary of Defense rather than Robert Gates coming in? Because, you know, the Bush administration did have people like the Vice President saying things like, we'll be welcomed as liberators, and they'll drop flower petals in our wake.
And candy. You forgot the candy. I have a sweet tooth. No, Donald Rumsfeld was not a supporter of the surge. The surge would have failed miserably had he remained as head of the Department of Defense. The other person who wasn't a supporter of the surge was Admiral Fallon at U.S. Central Command. The Joint Chiefs also weren't supporters of the surge. And in fact, the one guy who had failed in Iraq, General George Casey, became the Chief of Staff of the Army. So he was put in a position where he could help stymie troop requests made by General Petraeus. This was just, it was horrible in terms of how we managed the strategy of this conflict. Now, at the end of his time as Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld penned a memo, which you can probably find online, in which he said, you know, here's a list of things that could go wrong in Iraq. And I think we need to surge U.S. forces there to prevent them from happening. It's pure, unadulterated BS. It was his covering his rear end for the record, when in fact he never believed in the surge. And by saying, oh, all these bad things could happen, it just allows him in later years to say, well, see, I predicted it, rather than doing what was necessary to make sure that those things didn't happen. In my view, Secretary Gates was a prince. He was, I understand he's coming out with a memoir, so you might want to have him here someday. But he was one of the better Secretary of Defenses in our history. And to see and I was there when both of them, and saw them both in action, and talk about a tale of two cities. Wow. Tale of two secretaries.
Is it true what you said then, that Malachi, the leader of Iraq now, didn't win enough votes to win? He lost by like 2 votes, you said?
Yeah. So there's about 300 and, forget the exact number, but roughly 340 seats in the Council of Representatives, kind of equivalent to our U.S. Congress. He won 89. Iyad Allawi won 91, and they were the two top vote getters. So Allawi won the election by two votes in terms of two seats in the Council of Representatives. It should have given him the first crack at forming a government. It's a parliamentary system. The side that wins gets the first option to form a government. And then if they can't get enough votes to do that, then it goes to the next party. In fact, had we given Iyad Alawi authority and had we backed him and said, yeah, you get first crack, he probably could have cobbled together enough votes. He would have had the Kurds on his side. He might have been able to get Muqtada al-Sadr in the office of the martyr Sadr on his side. But even if he didn't get enough votes to become prime minister, and had he become prime minister, Iraq would not be where it is today, because he was very much willing to work with the United States. We'd still have U.S. forces there. Now, some of you might say that's a bad thing, but I think it would have been a good thing for Iraq at any rate. Even had he not been able to become prime minister, he would have seen that. He would have seen that we weren't the ones preventing him from becoming prime minister. You know, he just couldn't get the votes, and so then they would have give Maliki the shot at it. But by skipping over Alawi and going right to Maliki, basically what was happening is Iran was pulling the strings behind the scenes, and the deal to keep Maliki in power was made in Tehran, not in Washington. And you know that we just lost all sorts of power and leverage. It was amateur hour. I don't think that would have happened had we had Ryan Crocker as ambassador in Baghdad. Unfortunately, he had left by that time. We had someone else, and it was not the right guy.
Dr. Mansoor, from your time in the surge, you got a real firsthand look and hands-on with the Sunni and the Shia. Could you tell us a little bit about what should we know about the differences that exist between them? Does either sect preponderate in the among the Al-Qaeda? What should we know about these sects and these terms?
Okay. I actually talk about this in Baghdad at sunrise, but the Sunni and Shia are both Muslims. It is an argument that goes back to the 7th century over which part of, over which leadership group will control Islam. So the Shia believe that it's only blood descendants of Muhammad that should control Islam. The Sunnis basically said, no, it's whoever is the best person. And the blood descendants of Muhammad, you know, they lost their case in the Battle of Karbala. The Sunni Caliph in Damascus sent his army under a guy named Yazid, and they surrounded the Imam Hussein in Karbala and killed his party to the last man. Kept, you know, marched the women back to Damascus with Hussein's head on a spike. And that began the Shiat Ali, the party of Ali. Ali was Hussein's father, the blood descendant of Muhammad. And so the Shia are the party of Ali, saying Ali was the rightful caliph. It wasn't this guy Muawiyah in Damascus. The Sunnis are saying, no, you know, Muhammad never said this was going to be a hereditary religion. It should be the best guy, and the best guy was, you know, Muawiyah. That argument has come down to this day. So Shia and Sunni, both Muslims. It's like, I won't say it's like Catholic and Protestants, but like Catholic and Protestants are both Christian. Shia and Sunni are both Muslim. So that's the argument. Now, much more of the Islamic world is Sunni than Shia. The Shia are predominant in Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, portions of the rest of the Gulf, and there's a chunk of them in southern Lebanon, some even as far as Afghanistan. The Sunnis have everything else. The Al-Qaeda, they're all Sunni. Al-Qaeda believe that the Shia are apostates, that they've fallen away from the religion, that they worship saints, this idea of the occultation of the Mahdi, for instance. The Sunni hardliners would never agree to worship people. In their view, there is no God but Allah. Allah is the one you should worship. There should be no symbols or icons dedicated to him. And so that's part of the reason that they're fighting. I'm trying to think what else I was going to say. What was some other things that you were asking?
One, I understand they can't even agree on.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. In Iraq itself, you know, people say, oh, this is a millennium-old conflict. Well, actually, no, it's not. Everyone in Iraq was Sunni, or most of people, until the 19th century. And then the Shia clerics in Najaf controlled the water of the Euphrates River and the canals. And basically, if you wanted to go from being a goat herder, camel herder, to settling down into an agricultural society, you had to get water from the Ayatollahs. And the Ayatollahs said, you can have water from us, you have to become Shia. And so all these Sunni tribes converted to Shia Islam. It was a recent phenomenon. You want to read more about that, there's a book called The Shia of Iraq by Vali Nasser that covers that. So Iraq was not a highly polarized society in terms of religion. When I got to Baghdad, you know, I'd say 30% of the city, by some estimates, were mixed marriages, Shia and Sunni. And there wasn't this big conflict over religion. We opened the door to that conflict. And the jihadists then pushed it open by targeting. It was their strategy to target Shia with car bombs and suicide bombers to force them to fight back so that there would be a civil war, and that would create the chaos that would enable al-Qaeda to create a safe haven in Al-Anbar and the Sunni Triangle, which worked for a time and may work again. Unfortunately, they have a new lease on life because of the civil war in Syria. So that gives you a little bit of flavor for what's going on.
Any more questions?
Well, thank you very much for showing up. Thank you. I'm surprised I didn't get a question about General Petraeus' affair. What would you like to know? Christmas presents are for sale in the back, and I'd be happy to sign them.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate having you out here, and we don't have much, but we do have a small token of our appreciation. There we go. So thank you very much. Just to let you know that in November, in 2 weeks from now, the first Wednesday of November, we're going to have Jorg Muth, who is going to talk about the command culture, officers' education in the U.S. Army and the German Army during World War II, and the differences and the results of those. So that should be a very interesting day with history for November. And then also, as we always do, Cantini Post 556 of the American Legion always supports the Midwest Shelter for Homeless Veterans here in Wheaton, Illinois. They always have a table out there with the red, white, and blue mailbox. If you have any extra change, please, donate and help our homeless veterans. And thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your attendance here. Also, the pancake breakfast the Legion is hosting on the 2nd of November from 7 a.m. till 1 p.m. over at the Les Jardins restaurant at the Visitor Center. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.